they need a lost wax casting animation, they can go there and get one. So I don't like us, we have few resources. I don't like to see us reinventing the same thing over and over again because we want to. Because the color they did it in 10 years ago wasn't a color we liked. I just don't think that makes, it's not frugal. In America, we say Holly is up on her soapbox. Do you have that term? Because soapboxes were big crates, and if someone wanted to make a speech in town, they would put a soapbox down and they would stand on top of it, and people had to listen to it. So, I will get down off my soapbox now. I'm sorry, I really did say this out loud last night, and I had 50 minutes worth of material. I just started talking fast. All right. Any other questions? Any other ways I can shake my finger at you and say? I will say, I spent I had to disappear for an hour because I'm very interested in the Shang dynasty. I'm interested in oracle bones and oracle shells. And what is it? And so the people at the Institute for History and Philology kindly gave me a tour of the most wonderful installation I've ever seen. If you have not been over there, it is such a fantastic installation about the origins of China that you're not a good museum professional if you have not gone and seen that installation. All right.
How about let's start the panel discussion since you just, or any other questions?
我想我就用中文提问哈，sorry yeah 谢谢。
Oh, I have my head set up here.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Harley. 我的问题哈，就还是回到这个讲解了这个那个题目里面，好，就是有关于变异这个事情。Is it okay for you? Yeah. 就有关于变异这个事情，每个时代都有它的变异。那我们很荣幸，也很有幸运，能够在博物馆里面工作，得到人们的信任。而这样子一个变异，在文艺复兴时出现，那么在现在也出现。包括观众的类型，过去不曾在博物馆出现的观众，或者是从来博物馆不会重视的观众，现在可能都成为我们在这个变异时代所要面对的。那么，不管是social media 或者是 Facebook， 它所服务的是属于某一些特定的，在这个变异时代的特定族群。那回来，我想要跟Holly在讨论的是说，博物馆怎么样再去面对更多所谓被我们这个社会所排除的这些族群的这些可能的变异的对象，我们博物馆怎么样去服务？接下来也就是，当我们如果有这个想法要去服务这些人的时候，我们怎么样去跟博物馆的 curator， 所谓我们博物馆的同仁，甚至于是我们所博物馆服务的这个馆长也好，或这个当局，让他们看到这样子变异，即使只是一点点少数的需求，而得到一个可能更多差异的对待跟服务。那这是我的问题，谢谢。可能没有一个可能有点大，但是这个是我真的很想提问，而且从这个主讲者这个发言里面上，让我看到这样子的一个肥皂箱，可能对我来说我也站上去了，谢谢。
Thank you. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to give you an answer you particularly like. I think that museums should not try to be all things to all people. That doesn't mean I think that every person deserves a good experience at a museum, that ought to be our goal, that every visitor who comes in the door should have a great experience. There is something in the United States called motocross. Do you know what motocross is? It's like motorcycles. It's motorcycles and they go over hills and things and sand. I went to a motocross once. I'm glad I went. I don't want to go again. I think the mistake that we make in museums is we think that everybody should like museums as much as we do. And it's really just not that way. So again, I think that if you have a staff, if you understand the mission of your museum, and if you have the resources, you should try to serve all your audiences. But what I've seen in the past 20 years is museums saying, we need to serve this audience, we need to serve this audience, we need to serve this audience, we need to serve this audience. Do we serve all audiences in a mediocre fashion, or do we try to do what we do well? And again, I don't know that there's a good answer. And I will say that in terms of individuals with disabilities, the issue is not everybody is interested. I'm an art museum, so let me talk from an art museum perspective. Not everybody is interested in art. Whether you're in a wheelchair or you can't hear or you're fully functional, I want you to have a great experience at an art museum. What I'm not sure about is producing programs in anticipation that we might have an audience, based on some sort of particular need. I'm uncertain about us diverting our resources in that way. Again, I come from an art museum perspective, and one of the things that's very hard for us is talking about audiences who are blind. And so it's a big deal in art museums. And the majority of blind people who come to museums are people who were originally sighted, who are an older demographic, who can't see as well. And so providing services for them is different. And sometimes it means having labels that are with bigger font. It's different from saying we need programs to introduce art to people who physically have never been able to see. That's quite a different problem that someone's trying to solve. And I was at, there's a big conference every year in the United States called WebWise, and it's sponsored by one of our national organizations called the Institute for Museum and Library Services. And I can't remember, Diana, the name of the guy who does the maps, the private collector of maps in Los Angeles?
David Rumsey.
David Rumsey. There's a man named David Rumsey who has this fantastic collection of maps, and he's fabulously wealthy, and he does all these wonderful projects, all paid for by him. And he came to this conference, and he showed a map of Yellowstone Park, this great park in America, and it was a map from the early 19th century, and he'd had 3D developers do fly-throughs. So you actually felt like you were flying through this map in 3 dimensions. It was fantastic. And at the end of his talk, this is a government-sponsored conference, someone got up and said, that was wonderful, Mr. Rumsey. Have you ever thought about making those projects accessible to the blind? And he tipped his head and he said, no, I'm a very visual person. And sometimes I think we have to tip our heads and say, this is about visual art. And so the British galleries, I don't know if any of you have been to London, there were 10 years ago, they reinstalled the British galleries. And there was a lot of talk about all of the things they'd done to make those galleries accessible, including Braille labels on certain key works of art. And they weren't on every work of art, and they weren't always at the same level. And so my question is, at that point, you have to have someone who's coming in with you anyway. Who were the Braille labels for? Were they actually for blind people, or were they for sighted people to be able to say, oh, look, we've provided labels for the blind? And in sort of one of the bravest decisions I think ever made by a cultural institution This is not about a disability, it's about a language issue. In America, particularly in California, we're all about providing things in Spanish because a great part of the population is Spanish speaking. And particularly in San Diego, where I was working, that was a big deal. Well, the San Diego Museum of Art did focus groups with members of the Hispanic community from all the countries in South America. And, we said, do you want labels in Spanish? What do you want from us? Do you want us to do shows about Spanish artists? And the group looked at us and said, you know what, we're just like you. We like Impressionist paintings. We'd like to see Impressionist paintings, and said what would really be helpful is if we had ways to get to the museum, if there were bus routes, if there was a convenient way for us to get to the museum, and if there were someone at the front desk who could tell us where the bathrooms were, that, we don't need the things you want to provide us with, ask us what we want. And so the San Diego Zoo, which is the 800-pound gorilla, it's the biggest cultural organization in San Diego, was getting pushed. You have to have everything labeled in Spanish, you have to have everything labeled in Spanish. So they spent a year and a half tracking people who were coming through the zoo and finding out what the most needed languages were. And you know what they came up with? They said we're gonna do significant labeling and audio tour in the three languages needed most by our audiences. And you know what they were? English, Japanese, and French.